You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm SavageMick.
I'm Dave.
I'm Scarr.
Okay, and this week we're going to talk about top five waifus in...
Counter podcast says here, I have a 93% chance to cancel your podcast and substitute with my own.
Those numbers are too high. Or if we're playing XCOM, you'll miss. Go ahead, what have you got?
I was just thinking that we could...
Come on, man.
I was just thinking that we could have a podcast about counter spells, counteractions, cancellations, and other things in gaming where the point of your ability is to stop someone else from doing something.
Got my...
And...
Okay.
Is it okay?
I have my Minsk body pillow here. Okay, you know what? I'll put that away. Okay, counter actions, negative actions, negativity. Mm-hmm. Oh, now you got my goat. Look away, Minsk. This could get pretty gnarly. Okay, yeah, so negative actions, counter actions, actions that negate actions. I think we've said all the different ways you can say it, really. It's the move, either on the part of the GM or the players, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, anyone have any thoughts on these? Because I got
Dave, you want to go first?
Yeah, they've the potential to make things a little dull. If they become the sole determining factor in combat, as in I attack. No, you don't. I dodge with 100% chance. I parry with 110% chance, or I look at you funny and your spell doesn't happen.
Have you played Deathwatch recently, Dave?
Not recently, but having ran and played in several campaigns, I'm very familiar with the ludicrously high numbers which can be used to dodge and parry in that game.
Yeah,
and the force fields with the percentage chance to stop things. However, those are limited, as in you only get so many reactions to spend on dodges and parries. Force fields, you get one shot, and none of them offer total protection, so there is that. But as much as I like Deathwatch, there's a fair bit of dice rolling to see does an attack actually land, and I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that sort of oddly that seems to have carried through to the modern edition of Wolfrup too, where according to fellow host Owen, one of the big things is that people can very easily get like 10 points of combat advantage and just be immune to anyone else's attack, or even get stronger if someone attacks them.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of a aha moment in a narrative where you're observing this stuff going on, and suddenly the hero pulls out a quick-witted response that counters or negates or turns the tables on their nemesis. That's where this kind of stuff comes from, I think. However, when you couch it in the mechanics of a game, it very quickly becomes a sort of a race to the status quo. Or, even worse, all of the cool things that would have happened in a fight are left, or sort of, they shove each other off the board, and instead it's reduced to who can punch who in the face hard enough for long enough. Because you've taken all of the quick or dynamic ways of finishing a fight off the table. They've been countered or they've been outmaneuvered. I will accept that there are probably places where things like counter spell might have some utility. But too often it is a case of, when you're kind of optimizing builds, it seems to be a case of where everything gets stacked up to try and prevent anything from actually happening until it has to. And then what's left is some goons with swords and boards. The wizards have exhausted themselves on making sure that they're opposite pointy hat didn't get to do anything either. Pretty dull stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, but like when it comes back to me, is like I have this. I would agree in general that it can feel narrowly unsatisfying to like just have all of someone's amazing spells or cool finishing moves just get negated, but sir, there's the sort of PC NPC dichotomy here is where like players very definitely want ways to stop bad things from happening to them and their precious characters. And in a lot of cases, this will then automatically transfer to, well, if the PC should have it, the NPCs need to have it too, and thus we get the counterspell fights that are so ubiquitous in early 5th Ed. But like very often, I feel like there's very little in the way of soft countering. There's a little way of, well, I want to do something about this fireball that's coming at my face is going to fry all these orphans, but like the only options are I make something up with the GM about jumping on the grenade, which isn't in the rules, or I do this hard counter. And the hard counter does reduces the drama, but gets what the player wants. At a price which is mechanically balanced, but isn't dramatically interesting. It's just like, because like what you want in that scenario is like you have this young idealistic wizard and defending orphans from fireballs. You kind of want this big straining thing where they're going as they hold back the flames from the crying children, and they have to strain themselves to push it back and keep everyone safe. But there's not a lot of straining camp.
Yeah, but mechanically that becomes I spend the spell slot because I had it prepared. What is it, 4th level spell slot or whatever. The actual strain should probably be, okay, you want to save these orphans and these kids, whatever. That's a year off your life.
Ooh.
Now.
Well, that's an interesting choice.
How do you see? This is the problem with countering, as we so often find it. It is binary. It is arbitrary. And you said it was fairly priced. I'd actually say the counters are generally trivially priced, because they only ever ask you to forgo something you'd prepared, something you were prepared to lose. Counters almost never ask of you something that you will bitterly miss, like, say, permanent reduction to health, or a stat, or that hell, even something like that spell slot is burned out for the rest of this lunar month, something like that. It should, I think, countering should, if it is going to be so powerful as to stop something from happening, from negating the action or agency of another player or other entity in the game, it should come with a cost. And too often, I think the costs are trivial, and are simply non-existent. Well, spell slot, I'll get that back tomorrow. Just as long as nobody actually did anything important or final in the game.
Yeah, because we have our. You'd want this to be. Well, there's a couple ways I could attack that. One is the. I think I've used this argument before. It's just like, that's fine if Fireball is this once in a lifetime thing where you need to stop this orphanage this one time from Bargal, the Fireball expert. But if you're like a level 10 party and you're getting Fireballed every round, should it still have that same cost?
Well, this is the problem with Vancian magic systems. They probably shouldn't have the Vancian magic systems are where things like counterspell show up, but they probably shouldn't exist there. If you are to have something so powerful as the ability to counter another magic user's activation of their will or their magical intent, then it should probably be in a system that has a lot more nuance and in terms of how things are paid for. And Vancian simply isn't. It's mark a slot off. You're done for the day.
Yeah, Sorry.
No, that's you're right. In a world of infinite fireballs, or potentially infinite fireballs, you can't be paying a year off your life every time you want to counter one. So yeah, there are problems with ruling out hard counters, but I feel like at least if the fireball goes off and the orphans burn, then you have something narratively very satisfying to deal with. The guy cast fireball with the intent of burning down a bunch of orphans, and I stopped him with counterspell, and then the fight was over and he got away, or he handed him over to the authorities, as opposed to the guy cast fireball and I could not save those orphans, or at least I could only save a portion of them, and it cost me a year of my life. And now I don't care what the authorities say, he's going to pay, and he's going to pay with his life for each one of those lives that were snuffed out. That's going to give you something to work with. Kind of just, with the magic system that we use, I know we're skirting around the fact that we're really just talking about D&D here. But with these kinds of magic systems, we just wipe the chalkboard clean at the end of the combat and go, well, everyone picks themselves up, puts their hit points back on, and gets on with it. I think hard counters just lead to outcomes that are either slogfests or nothing happens.
The way you actually you phrase that, where like counterspell is something you've prepared, actually does make me think this is like, because I also thinking in terms of stuff like Magic the Gathering and other CCGs, where you'll have this card, which is sort of your trap card, to your opponent's playing some big vital piece of their combo, and you go counterspell, 2 blue mana. And yeah, it's the fact you put that in your deck. You were ready to counterspell, but what you're describing, I would say more is less something about a spell and more some kind of dramatic action where your player is, say, paying one of their permanent hero points. It's just like, I want to, out of the normal back and forth of combat, I want to leap in front of this fireball and hold it back, save as many orphans as I can, as a special narrative action that a player has paid some resource for, or put their body and soul in the line. So it's like, okay, you protect the orphans, but you take that many orphans worth of fireball damage.
Okay.
That's what you get more narratively satisfying. But then you're sort of back to the idea of negotiating with your gems. It's like, I want to have this moment. I want to do something off the cuff and weird, and not all GMs are comfortable going, well...
Then they should probably stick to adjudicating Magic the Gathering tournaments. Like, narrative role-playing games are only have 1 foot in the rules system. People who talk about Raw are really sort of saying, I only want to play the game with my left foot. You gotta, if your both feet are in there, you've actually got a lot more, emotional work to do. Because you're going to have to negotiate with the GM, because in theory you're both engaging in storytelling. You're telling the GM about stuff, the GM's telling you about stuff, and you have to be willing to settle some things on a narrative fiat or on some sort of agreement. Otherwise, well, you're not really role playing. You're just kind of playing a board game with some very, very badly errated rules.
Something you said, Mick, a little earlier kind of had me thinking, the lack of nuance, because, say, back to that example, like there might be quite a difference in snuffing out that fireball entirely, or I want to redirect it onto the party, because the party can take that fireball,
that's a great idea.
even if it will hurt.
I love it.
Because, well, to copy the phrase, that's what heroes do. As in,
that's wonderful.
Are you willing to take the hit? And the enemy who chucked that fireball's still there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, that's really interesting, because it turns it from counter into redirect, and now it's on you as to where it lands, and that's a really satisfying idea. Much better. Now, you can't really do that if you've got hard counters in your system, because anyone who's kind of looking to survive long term will look at that and go, well, of these two, one makes it not happen, and one makes someone have to take the penalty. So I'll go with the one that doesn't make it happen. Like, I guess when we talk about counter spells and negative actions, where they are present, I'm kind of planting a flag and going, we might have to go all the way back to the start here and rework this. There are Magic systems that don't have counter spells, if I can recall correctly. I think, pretty sure Mage 2nd Ed didn't really have any facility for countering. I know Shadowrun 2nd Ed did, but it was a more convoluted affair, and it did require that you sort of pay costs, which is why I'm led to believe that it is possible. Like, I'm not just going to throw my hands in the air and say, this shouldn't exist and we shouldn't do them. I think when there's Rocket Tag games being played, with the potency of the spells involved, then there's an argument for counterspell as a hard counter, or something of that ilk. Because the consequences of failing to counter become, you are dead and the game is over. But I think GMs and players alike should be open to the ideas where potent spells can go off, and consequences are paid, but you are not dead and the game is not over. But you're certainly, probably, if you don't have a way out of it or around it, you're not going to be happy, because that's the consequence of people throwing big spells at you. Survivable, yes. Like I said, it's a big old can of worms. Now, we'll go a little longer. Okay, Shane, I'm sure you've got some other ideas around this, and you've probably encountered more systems with counters than I have. So,
I do in fact have a list, but I did want to bring up, go over that point again. It's just like, the thing about the hard counter is that it sort of lives in a environment where each action is significant, and thus, when what you counter is sort of very important. Very few people will argue, like, no one counters a cantrip, as an example. Like, no one counters, I zap him for 10 damage. Unless you're a very low level game, that's not what you're going to be doing. You'd be rolling to you counter or use your perfect dodge or something when this sword will cut your head off, or or the orphans will die, or the king will denounce you all, your death sentence on all of you if they're charmed, So it's sort of this balance of drama. It's just like if every single move someone makes in the game is this massive dramatic thing, then you need to be able to count and cutter thrust, but also, the hard counter becomes less satisfying. Whereas if an individual action is only going to nudge things one way or the other by a few hit points or one or two, levels of agreeability, then no one bothers countering. And it often becomes far more about racing to an objective or, tug of warring back and forth.
Yeah, which again, is sort of it's sometimes you want to play those slower games that allow you to avoid outright defeat and edge your way towards victory. There's game styles there's certainly games that suit that approach. Mulling over this and being aware that I'm basically throwing my toys around a little bit, I can think of examples of times when counter spells and other negations like that are actually quite appropriate, and that is when you are, and this, your talk of Magic the Gathering actually put this in my mind. Most counter spells in Magic are instance effects. You're trying to do something, I'll interrupt you doing it, and stop you from doing it, and now your action is negated. Okay, kind of irritating. However, when something's already on the board that is causing you problems, and you can counter it or disrupt it, that's kind of a really good... I think that's a place where Counterspell kind of lives. You approach the big bad in his sanctum, the ritual is nearly complete, he's surrounded by overlapping shells of magical protection. we're going to need to tear those down. Oh, we can't do any fire damage to him until we get rid of his aura of fire protection. Okay, that's a great use for a counterspell. Open up the field, change the parameters of the combat so that other characters have a chance to affect it, or that your next Fire Lance spell is going to hit true and end the fight before it's begun. That's a kind of a place where I think counterspell, I'm much more comfortable seeing it in use, or spells of its ilk type, negative actions to that effect. The same with...
That sounds fun.
Same with, say you take a kind of high action game like Feng Shui, where sometimes you'll have a move that disrupts a sniper's aim or interrupts a charge, things like that. Those are slightly more dynamic because they tend to change the game state in a more interesting way. The interrupted charge means you're now out of position, or that enemy is in a place they didn't expect to be, rather than they never started the charge in the first place. The sniper misses the shot and has revealed their position. Now you've got another thing to worry about. You've got to cover that angle on the battlefield before you can deal with the main threat. Things like that. Like, I think there's a place, I think on reflection, there's a place for countering things that are in place and setting a status quo to shift the tempo of the battle or the rules of engagement. But in the moment when someone declares they're going to do something and you go, actually you're not, now you've missed your turn, essentially. That's where I think that's the line I draw between good counter and bad counter.
That does remind me of something from one of the Fantasy Flight 40k RPGs. I believe they introduced in Rogue Trader and a talent called Bodyguard. And you can interrupt an attack coming in on somebody else near you, and you basically take the hit and you lose your next turn. However, that could save a very squishy party member from getting splattered.
Yeah, that's
there's a cost there, but it's worth it, possibly.
Yeah, I think we'll sort of come around this idea of redirection as opposed to negation. It's just like, we still want there to be some narrative progress. We want something to happen, but it means we don't want to negate all consequences. We want to change what the consequences are. We want to give, instead of a player's shutting down some narrative consequences, they get to basically renegotiate it or recost it, pay it in blood or exhaustion levels rather than in spell slots.
Absolutely. I'm kind of warming to it now that I've been introduced to it. I was so blind in my absolute abhorrence of countering it all that I hadn't considered it. But you're right, it's a much more nuanced way. And again, it does that great thing that you should always hope to do in a game. It gives players hard choices.
Yeah. Okay, so I had some other elements to this topic. One is the sort of... Is it different when it's an active counter versus when it is a passive resistance? Say... Is it different to say, I cast stun and someone else counterspells it, versus I cast stun and says, well, this enemy has this feat and this feat and this prestige class, so they're immune to stuns? Does that annoy you in the same way, or is it
not
a matter of context? Not
as such, although I do like the examples about 100% dodge chances. I'll always raise an eyebrow at systems that allow you to 100% ignore a subsystem in the rules.
I think the cap is 95%, but yeah.
Oh, you just know someone's cheesing their way around that, especially in the 40k, the Black Library 40k.
And you got your fate points, and then you got your force wield roll and your Terminator armor.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you very quickly get that 2-up invulnerable save going on 2d6.
2-up, and you got 2 rerolls, and then you have 5-up, feel no pain. I'm sure there's
so that we're getting that 95 up to where 99.975, something like that. It's those ones I'm kind of like, I don't know. But presumably there are opportunity costs there, because to be an acrobatic ninja dodger, you have to forego something else, which is fine. Now, I mean, if it means you never take damage to one of the fundamentals, be it hit points or stamina or your luck or whatever it is that's being used to adjudicate how long you can stay in a fight, then yeah, I think there's a problem there. It's effectively a hard counter, and thus it robs the action of any significance. Not to mention, it's usually you leaving the rest of your party to suffer whatever that fate is while you dance across the tops of daisies, avoiding the fireball. So, I guess everyone should kind of look out for themselves, yes, but systems like that make me want to raise an eyebrow. Do I have as big a problem with them? Probably not. You probably still need to do things like breathe or go asleep at night, things like that, which will leave you vulnerable to the kind of enemy who's discovered that they can't just lob fireballs at you or send in the thermal detonators. You're going to have some other weakness. Enemies who absolutely do need to get you got will probably try and exploit those. I'd like to see a dodge Ebola.
That's a fair point. Although I guess I was thinking of it very much in terms of arbitrary monster resistances. This is like, like, is it okay? I don't want to repeating other party members' points again, but Liam is often awful fond of bringing up first edition Pathfinder days as this sort of omni status effect that just seems to ruin everyone.
Oh, days, yeah, the kind of the cuckoos flying around your head stuff. Yeah, well, it's, I think, the more powerful than people realize. Usually very short duration. So,
but if the average fight is handled in 3 rounds, is even 1 round of someone just sits around looking at the cuckoos?
Yeah,
maybe
I guess it depends how often you can hand it out, and again, I'm sort of, I mean, I often rag on players, but I'm very, I'm actually a player cheerleader in the sense that all the important stuff in the game is happening because of the players, and they're going to be in every scene, no matter what the rotating cast of characters around them is, NPCs, enemies, allies, whatever. They have to show up to do more work, to take more of the licks than anybody else. So the game should probably be weighed in their favour, in the sense that if it's 10 against 1, that's probably fair. That should, in game mechanics terms, that should probably be fair. They should be able to get out from under that eventually, and then turn up and do it again the next day. So if it's the NPC enemies handing out days to players that they outnumber 10 to 1, then that's going to be a big problem. If it's the players handing it out on the regular, but they're only able to affect 10% of the enemies on the board, then I think that's perfectly fine. Because they're going to be really selective about which 10% they affect, so that it allows them to mop up the other 90% and then deal with the big threats. Yeah, so I'd very much go, it depends. It's like, PC side, fine. NPC side, yeah, screw them. They're there to get knocked over.
Yeah, it's just sort of what is the price, what's the cost of an action, what's the cost of a turn in your turn-based initiative order? Because I actually saw a good thread about this on Twitter recently. It's just like, in older games, like First Ed D&D or Basic D&D, an individual turn was rarely of all that much value. You would get very quick combats where I roll 15, I miss. I roll 8, I miss. I roll 17, I hit. And that would be 3 different players, or 3 different hirelings, depending on how well they're playing. And your wizard wasn't casting a really complicated spell every round because they only had 1 spell and they were saving it for the boss fight or the lair of kobolds. So an individual actually wasn't that valuable, and if someone was paralyzed for a few turns, they weren't really missing more than an actual minute or 2 of playtime, as it were, in a game. But as we've moved towards less wargaming and more narrative focused games, people have one character. The character has a whole bunch of cool abilities, and a fight will generally be decided by round 5, if not already over. So cancelling someone's action suddenly has a really big dramatic cost on the game. And that's sort of a difference in design that things like D&D struggle with, and newer games which have to take their own approaches to. And a lot of games are sort of trying to move out of that turn-based strategy. You see something like a Powered by the Apocalypse game. A player will have the actions based on how long the GM or storyteller is focusing the camera on them. And the GM is sort of encouraged to, let them have a few moves, then get them to a dramatic point, and then switch the camera to another player and say, you see all this happening, what do you do now? Which sort of gives more leeway for things like partial counters, redirections and stuff, because you have more narrative flexibility, but doesn't have the hard, direct, I can affect, everyone affects everything in turn, and, their build choices matter, impulsive like Pathfinder or D&D. So...
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the kind of GMs that find themselves running Powered by the Apocalypse games, they tend to be quite experienced. They tend to have a very good grasp of what is narratively satisfying in a fight, and balanced against kind of what is a challenge and what is fair, and how to keep that spotlight moving. Like raw, tactical combat games, I think they favor, and this is not to say that people who exclusively like to run them are not experienced, but they do give you a very, very concrete set of rules upon which to adjudicate everything that's going on. And you don't have to have that other foot in the fight. In terms of, you don't have to have your narrative hat on as well if you don't want to. Honestly, I think those games work best when... It's like, I'm falling between two stools here. I think the tactical combat games, grid-based, whatever, work best when they have all of that there at your disposal, and there is enough trust and leeway between players and GMs to allow the narration to sometimes fudge the rules. I find myself a little bit intimidated by things like Powered by the Apocalypse because there isn't enough of a framework in terms of the rules. It's very loose. I wouldn't be comfortable running it the way I know others do, because I'm not confident enough that I can keep the impartiality and the fairness. Am I going to get lost in, this is narratively cool, or this is really dramatic in the moment, this look good on TV? So, I think there's a sweet spot, although it's very hard to hit. I'll mention the system, I think, does this fairly well at the end, and blows my entire argument out of the water. So, classic Switch.
Dave, any thoughts that you have on this?
The notion I'm having is that making completely hard countering things too easy and too cheap, just removes a lot of interesting encounters to my mind. As in, spell's coming for you. No, it isn't. I've launched my perfect attack. No, you haven't. Having it redirected or soft countered, as in you still get hit, but you're able to deflect the blow with your skill partially, so you only get nicked. Nuanced responses, as in having interesting choices, I think is far better than a whole bunch of no, you didn't. At least not all the time. Maybe having a hard counter in the back pocket if you need it, but that will be expensive in some manner. Whether you only have so many of the stones which are guaranteed to stop a spell coming in, or it's going to cause blood to come out of like your various pores, like that sort of thing.
I wanted to just, before we kind of wrap up I wanted to just like, how do we feel about actions which are just for undoing other actions as opposed to countering them? Like, you've flung the fireball, everyone's taking 86 damage, and then next action, few moves later, the cleric will cast Greater Healing Word, and everyone gets all those hit points back. Presumably the orphans are still barbecued, but as regards the fight, the hit points are back, and is that sort of more acceptable? That's the idea of a back and forth thing of someone gets to do something, and then someone goes to a similar effort to undo something.
I think that would make for a more dynamic setup, as in, okay, what are my choices? Do I heal? Do I start healing? Do I start fighting back? Do I raise a shield against fire because I know that there's fire coming in? What is the right choice? And yeah, I think that actually makes for a more dynamic and interesting situation than didn't happen.
Yeah, it preserves the causal kind of sequence of events. Sure, everyone's feeling a bit crispier. But yeah, unless the cleric does something, the cleric's there partially to do that, right? But unless people invest a little bit of their time now to put themselves back together or to cast a spell that's going to heal the party, then yeah, that I suppose in some terms is a negation. It's certainly a reversal. But consider things are still on fire. Like, something has fundamentally changed about the fight. The soft furnishings are now on fire. It isn't the same battlefield it was a moment ago. Sure, you've got most.
And the orphans are dead.
The orphans are organising a bucket line. They're a very resilient breed. It's not the first time being fireballed. There could be many outcomes.
Just keep coming up for some reason.
But while you've solved the problem that you lost a bunch of hit points, you're now standing on a burning battlefield, and I think it's fine then. Like, you've got some motion forward in the narrative of the fight. The state has changed enough that just reversing the loss of hit points doesn't serve to simply negate the entire thing. And he's one less fireball in his arsenal, so get him. It's or he might have many more. Was that a bead he plucked from a necklace before he cast that fireball? Watch out. I think there's enough there to justify. Like, I know you mentioned healing in either at the top of the show or in one of the notes, but healing is dealing with the consequences rather than simply countering the action. Is that a fine line distinction? Yes, a little bit.
Mm. It's a matter of I suppose I could be really pedantic and then start talking about regeneration or passive healing and combine both my weird exceptions, but I don't know if we're going to find anything different there. Like, we're not trying to say that annoying things shouldn't happen. It's fine in some places for, this enemy is immune to daze, but not all enemies are immune to daze, and this, you can't fireball the fire giant, so the fire giant orphans are safe. Those kinds of immunities and minor combat things like trolls. Yeah, sure, the troll regenerates, but he has no armor class, so you can eventually hack him to bits. It just takes longer.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that he's standing in front of you is a counter to the idea that you could stand in the same place. I mean, that's probably broadening the definition a little too far if we start to explore that stuff. However, I will. My last thought on this is one of my favorite game systems for dealing with this is Blades in the Dark, which I think is kind of low key all about countering. Because unlike the normal narrative flow in most sort of fantasy combat games, Blades in the Dark proposes a different way of laying out the sequence of events. The GM is always telling you what the worst outcome of a scenario is, and as a player you're always coming up with exceptions and buyouts and counters to that, and then you negotiate on the price, which is kind of a lot of what we've talked about. And but because of the way it's presented, it goes from being clunky to quite a smooth back and forth between players and GMs. and those compromises and counters and payoffs are always generating the next set of circumstances for the GM to throw at you, which is what I like about that system.
Yeah, you have your sort of quantum utility belt of equipment you brought, and you basically just decide before the mission, well, I'm going to take 3 pieces of equipment and be at normal stealth, or someone's going to take 2 and they're going to be at enhanced stealth, and then someone to take 5, they're not going to be stealthy at all, but they have loads of equipment and tricks they can pull. And then you have the flashback mechanic to say, well, actually, I set this up ahead of time. And then if all that fails, you still have the stress mechanic where you can say, I'm going to roll to cancel like 2 of this 4 harm deadly fall by just saying I land on a hay cart, but that's going to give me like 5 stress. And then my character's going to be in bits afterwards. It's going to be the next 3 sessions sort of drinking himself into stupor to recover from the whole trauma of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. It's got all these different ways of going well, actually, without ever feeling like you're just negating an action and robbing whoever of their agency or their or consequences.
And I guess then the question becomes, can we steal those kinds of mechanics or that same sense of mechanical sport and put it into something with like hard counters like D&D? Can we turn your counterspell into something with an interesting cost? Could we, instead of exhaustion, could we add a stress mechanic where suddenly downtime becomes really important because you get rid of those stress levels
they just announced a Dark Souls 5th Ed conversion, didn't they? There's something official going on.
I'm terrified to even look at that.
To answer your question, I think sometimes you just have to walk away from... If what you're getting from a system isn't what you want, there are other systems, and it is perfectly fine to seek them out because they're doing the things you actually need to do to satisfy your needs in the game, be it a narrative or sort of... Because Blades in the Dark isn't the crunchiest game, but it has enough crunch framework that you can come up with interesting builds and finesse the system. And like, I think it's... As long as you don't want to spend your day on spreadsheets, Blades of the Dark is crunchy enough to satisfy most players' needs, while also expecting you to put your other foot in the fight and say to the GM, we're going to negotiate the consequences here, or I've got an idea, can we try this out? I feel like it lands the sweet spot more or less for the type of game it is. It's not going to work for everything, you know. There's something else out there that you're going to need if you want to run a mech combat game or something. I had wild ideas about how could you use Blades in the Dark to do mech combat at one point. It's like, no, just don't. Go and find the thing that'll actually do it properly. So to answer your question, like, I think sometimes you're just going to have to walk away from, especially if it's kind of a Vancian magic system with hard counters and things. It's a fine style of game to play, but if you want something else, if you want something that's more Ursula Le Guin, Wizard of Earthsea, the consequences are paid with time off your life, or debts you will owe forever, or Faustian bargains, then there are other systems that do that better, and you're not going to get them in a spell slot style system, or even a mana point style system.
Okay, I think we've probably come to a general conclusion here. I don't want to be going, hey, I'll just stop playing 5th Ed again, but...
I don't know, look, 5th Ed's very good for lots of things. D&D is very good for lots of things.
And besides, they basically nerfed Counterspell to uselessness now, so it's fine.
What was the adjustment they made?
That's a whole other argument.
We've already had it, I think. See previous episode.
Alright. So, okay, if Minsk is the cuddliest RPG waifu, what do we have to say about everyone's favourite drow? Can we get back to the top 5 RPG?
It does have that weird neck ruff thing anyway. Yeah. Well, clearly my counter has failed, so I guess we'll have to be subjected to this drivel for a while. But you in the party, you in the audience, you may be able to escape this by going to our Discord and hitting us up on social media, and ignoring all of the private messages that Savage sends you looking for suggestions.
Don't if it's got a spoiler image, don't click on it. Just there's other things you could be doing. All right.
Just block DeviantArt. But yes, until we get out of this nest of iniquity, I've been Scarr.
I've been SavageMick.
I'm Dave.
Wait. Oh, we're going to do that again. Scar, Dave, me. Yeah, we cut this bit.
Yeah.
So start again.
I've been Scarr.
I'm Dave.
And I've been SavageMick.
And this party is over.
Excellent.
Okay.
Stopping recording.
Stop. Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.